It's time to go beyond the headlines, cause I don't put in overtime just so I can headline. Okay, now it's Fox Sports, I'm live with Renee. Going hard every day, sports rapping every play. Different segments for your favorites, coming at you daily with positive vibes, yeah, we some game changers. Basketball, football, soccer, with different interviews, you never know who may pop up. Listen, only on Beyond the Headlines, this is Beyond the Headlines. Only on Beyond the Headlines, this is Beyond the Headlines. Only on Beyond the Headlines, this is Beyond the Headlines with Renee Washington.
There has been a lot going on in college football this past week, specifically down in Florida. So joining me on Beyond the Headlines with Renee Washington to get into Florida State's search for a new head coach, it's Tashan Reed, the Florida State beat writer for The Athletic. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Renee. How are you?
I am great, and I'm thrilled that you're on now. I mean, when we scheduled this before, it couldn't have been at a more perfect time to have you on the show with all that is going on down with Florida State. So let's get right into it. I mean, Florida State has been a powerhouse in the ACC, contenders for national championships, one of the top programs in the country up until a couple years ago. Willie Taggart had big shoes to fill, and he failed, leading the Seminoles to a 9-12 record. Now, you've been heavily in the middle of all the news since his firing. What has been going on behind the scenes at FSU this past week?
Well, I think, this past week it was just the initial steps in the coaching search. I think, there were some rumors that, they already had their guy and they were progressing on a done deal, but it was nothing of the sort. They engaged a coaching search firm and, established a list of candidates, and they started to reach out to a few candidates just to gauge their level of interest and, see what they were thinking on it. I think, this week that process will continue, and then from there they'll obviously set up meetings, and then once they identify a candidate, extend an offer, and we'll see what happens from there. But I think they're still in the pretty early stages of the coaching search. I know that alarms some people with the season, coming to an end in a couple weeks here and early signing period on the horizon, but they're pretty much just taking their time with it. It's a standard coaching search. The situations aren't standard by any means, but they're going about it in a pretty standard way.
Yeah, it's a process that needs to take time and be worked out properly. You cannot rush, and by any means, a head coach search. You need to make sure you have the right fit for the program. And I know something that I saw was a lot of people were actually surprised. Now, although in 21 games, Florida State had a 9-12 record under Willie Taggart, that's still not a lot of time. Or were you a little bit surprised by his firing and how soon it happened? Did you expect it to happen maybe after the season, or were you, fully in agreement when it did go down?
Yeah, I was pretty shocked by the timing. It really, until Chad Morris, this weekend, it really had never happened before for a coach at a Power 5 school to get fired before their second season is even over, minus, some sort of scandal or off-field issue or something of that nature happening. Just a simple results-driven decision that really hadn't happened in that manner before. And, I got the sense, after the Miami loss that, hey, he may be in danger this season, but I did think that they would at least give him until after the Boston College game to see, if they lost the game at that point, they would essentially be eliminated from bowl contention because they probably don't have much of a chance against Florida in the final game of the season. And so I thought they would wait and see, if he could, win and make it into a bowl game. But I think them, making the decision when they did signaled that they just didn't believe in him, that he could do it long term. And they figured, they were better off cutting ties now than waiting when they figured that, he was never going to reach the point where they want Florida State to get back to. But I just think the nature of the firing, we've just never really seen that. A guy hasn't been given that little time and paid that much money to be essentially just be getting rid of.
Yeah, and you talk about the money. I mean, the university owes him $18 million, and they reported that they would likely pay up around $20 million in total to fire the rest of the staff at the end of the season. I mean, this is a huge financial hit. You talk about the shock of it being so soon and also the financial side of it. It seemed like there was no doubt in their mind after losing to Miami that, putting aside the financial hit, maybe even a recruiting hit, I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but, a lot of times with recruiting classes, it's very common that throughout your process, the coach may change, and now you're going into a program with a different coach with a different style of coaching, a different values and things like that. But to look at all the external factors, the money, recruiting, the fact that it was still in season instead of waiting until after the season, how much of a hit do you think the program's going to take on that side of things too, behind the scenes?
I think you have to say a pretty big one. I mean, the compounding fact of the financial aspect is, the school has been losing, or not the school, but the program has been losing money for a few years now. They've been operating at a deficit as far as their budget goes for athletics. And, when you're already operating at a deficit, paying $20 million to get rid of a coaching staff and then spending probably an additional $5 to $10 million to hire the next coaching staff on top of that, that's a lot of money for a school that doesn't seem to have a surplus of it, and that requires, obviously a big commitment from boosters. And so you're giving them a certain level of power when it comes to the decisions. I mean, you can't really ask them for $25 or $30 million worth of money and not give them a say in what happens next.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's kind of dangerous whenever you give boosters that level of influence in any situation. But that's the case. I think another factor is the athletic director. He doesn't have much of a history as an athletic director. He was a politician for most of his professional career. He took over as an interim after Stan Wilcox left for the NCAA. And so he's somebody that won't be in that position for very much longer, probably another year or so, if that. And the president is also on his way out. And so that's another factor. I mean, usually an AD or a president will want to hire their guy, but I mean, these guys, they're not really going to be here, and so they're sort of making a decision for the university, not for themselves. I mean, I think any AD does that to a certain degree, but more so than usual given their situation. And then on the recruiting front, since the loss to Miami, they've lost three recruits, the decommits. They do feel they're still in the mix for a couple of those guys, but for now they've lost them. And, the rest of the recruiting class, even guys who haven't decommitted, some of them are starting to take official visits elsewhere and look around and see what their options are. I mean, you never know with a new coach. I mean, the coach themselves may not even want the kid anymore, especially if there's a kid that's maybe a 3-star, a lower 3-star. Coach may say, I don't want this guy. He doesn't fit my system.
Yeah.
So the kids have to do their due diligence and explore their options and prepare themselves for not only if they don't want to be there, but if the coach doesn't want them to be there. And so there's going to be an element on that front. And then an additional front is, they have several players, even though they may not have the best record. They have several players that, and I don't think that's any surprise with it being Florida State, who are candidates to declare early for the 2020 NFL Draft. Cam Akers, Marvin Wilson, Hampson Nasruddin, Stanford Samuels III. They have several guys who could declare early and leave. And, I mean, for a team that hasn't been that good, that's a lot of talent you can lose. And then if you take a recruiting hit on top of that, and if you have the financial implications, all of that comes together to say you could be in some trouble if you don't get this right. And so I think that's also a piece of why they're taking so long with this coaching search, because they really cannot afford to mess this up. They feel like they messed it up last time. They cannot do it again.
Wow. Oh, that is really bad. When you put all those pieces together, that is a recipe for disaster. I think with any time, just money aside and players that might leave and declare for the draft aside, anytime you have a new coach, it's almost like they're a step-parent. And nothing against step-parents, because it could go very well. A step-parent could love and adore their child, but a step-parent could also look at that child, in this case a player, like, that's not my child, I didn't raise that child, or in this case, I didn't recruit that player for my program, right. And that's exactly it. There's so many factors that go into this. Firing Willie Taggart is just, the start of it. It's the aftermath of what you talk about is what is really going to be the biggest impact on the future of the program. What happens to those recruits? If they do have recruits decommitting, who are they now going to bring in? That's the other thing. You have to bring in a class. Who is your class going to be made of if you don't have the money to bring in players, if you don't have the coach to go out and recruit the players? Now you're talking about here around November, turning around and quickly recruiting a class, to fill those spots with the players that decommitted. That's very problematic. So then could primetime Deion Sanders be the person to bring this all together? That rumor that came out had me really, I think my jaw hit the floor. Now, he did deny the claims that Deion Sanders did deny claims that he was considering taking the coaching job at his alma mater, but hey, who really is in the mix for the next head coach position? You talk about them still taking their time, but have you heard any names come forward besides him?
I mean, he's not a candidate. I'll start with that. That would
be something else to see, though. You got to admit.
Yeah,
that would be something else.
Yeah, that'd be interesting, but they're not doing that. I mean, I think the most prominent name has been Bob Stoops, but this is me personally, I don't believe he'll have much interest in the position just because he's happily semi-retired working with the XFL. He's very well off. Bob Stoops is not hurting for money, I promise you that. And I think it's a tough sell for him to walk into a rebuilding situation at a school that just gave a guy less than 2 years, at a school that's compromised financially and probably can't offer him the level of money it would take to get him out of his semi-retirement, considering he has tens of millions of dollars. So I think that's off the table. I think the most likely candidates are guys like Mark Stoops at Kentucky, Matt Campbell at Iowa State, Mike Leach at Washington State. Sort of those middle-tier coaches that aren't the splashiest of hires, but they're guys who have, several years of head coaching experience at fairly prominent programs, Power 5 programs. They've shown a history of being able to turn programs around, in a fairly timely manner. None of them have won on the level that Florida State is accustomed to winning and wants to win. And so that's sort of the question here. I mean, are any of those guys, all three of those guys are good coaches. Those are just three examples. Those aren't the only guys. Mike Norvell at Memphis is another name. Matt Rule at Baylor is another name. But all those guys have the same thing in common. They're good coaches, but can they get you to where you said Willie Taggart cannot get you? Because, if those guys, all they can do for you is 8 to 9 wins, who's to say Willie Taggart wouldn't have won 8 to 9 games next season? This is a $30 million move, so you can't really spend $30 million for a coach that you think may have the team be 1 to 2 games better than it would have been anyway. This next coach has to be somebody that you believe is capable of winning a national championship. Because that's what they say that the goal is. It'd be different if that's what they said. If that's not what they said, but that's, the athletic director would ask, what do you want in a candidate? He said somebody that can win national championships with that. And none of those coaches I just named have ever done that. And so it's about Bob Stoops.
Right.
And so do you spend $30 million collectively on a guy that's never done that and have this trust and the faith that he can do that? I don't know. I think they may be better off going with somebody who may be less established but has won national championships. And that's all three of the coordinators at Clemson, I think Tony Elliott, the offense coordinator who calls plays, would be a strong candidate. He'd be relatively cheap because he wouldn't have a buyout. He wouldn't cost that much overall just because it would be his first head coaching job, so he couldn't demand the salary that those other coaches would. He's proven, obviously, he's won 2 of the last 3 national championships, so he can win. He knows what he's doing. And I think even though he hasn't been a head coach, I don't think that's because he isn't ready. I just think that's because he's obviously in a very good situation at Clemson. And so,
right.
But, I think they haven't outwardly said this, but I think, their requirements and what they're saying they want lean towards somebody who's already established as a head coach who will drive season ticket sales and who they think is a proven commodity to a degree. And so that doesn't necessarily fit a coordinator who's never been a head coach before. So we'll see.
Right.
You could go on, maybe put together a list of 10 to 15 names of guys who make sense, but they haven't really leaned one way or the other, I would say. They haven't formally extended anyone an offer. So like I said earlier, it's very exploratory early stages.
Yeah. I think it is tough for any coach because there is a lot going wrong right now with Florida State. You even talk about beyond just the football program, the athletic director, the president of the school, you got to look at all of these pieces. And for someone to come in to this position, there's a lot that they would have to take on, and that
right.
end to have to take on with the expectation that they're going to be able to turn things around quickly. People are very
right.
impatient in college athletics, especially with bigger sports like football. They expect you step in within a year, things better be better or else your job's on the line as well. So good luck to whoever does step into that role. But for now, the interim head coach for Florida State, did help lead them to a win against Boston College. Not saying, that's everything's turning around for the good, but there's a small positive and a small silver lining in all this. They did get a win this past weekend, and then they play Alabama State this upcoming weekend. So for you, as you're following along with all the mayhem that's unwrapping throughout this head coach search, what's it going to take for them to really just keep focused to finish the season strong and go from there? One step at a time, see if they can pull out a strong end to the season.
Yeah, well, I think they've made an effort to tamper down things as far as outside noise. This past weekend, this week, they canceled all media availabilities for players and coordinators, so they're not opening themselves up to guys maybe saying something stupid or they don't want to be said and getting out there and creating unwarranted or unnecessary negative attention.
Right.
And so they kept things very internal in order to stay focused. They tried to stay out of getting caught up in all of those off-field distractions that there are right now surrounding the program. I think this upcoming week, they won't say it, but they're not losing to Alabama State, obviously. It's an FCS school. I know they almost lost to Stanford last year. I know they're FCS school, but I just don't see it being much of a game, honestly. Sorry. I think the bigger question comes 2 weeks from now when they're preparing to go against Florida in Gainesville to cap off the season. Even if they have a bowl berth at that point, by winning 6 games, obviously that's still a big game that they want to win. They got destroyed by Florida last year, so there's obviously some intensity to that rivalry with them just getting blown out on their home field. They have something to prove in that final game, but I think the goal here obviously is to just make a bowl game, coming off of missing their first one in 36 seasons last year. They don't want to go out as the team to miss a bowl game for the second straight season in a row, especially if it's because they lose to a school like Alabama State. No, not against Alabama State, but it's nowhere close to Florida State just in terms of football. And so, I think they're just trying to filter out distractions, trying to stay focused on the task at hand. And it's cliche, but, take it one game at a time. I feel like, if they seal the deal this weekend, they'll take a huge weight off their shoulders because realistically nobody really expects them to beat Florida. That doesn't mean they won't try to beat Florida, obviously, but even if they lose to Florida, as long as they're playing in a bowl game in December, I'm pretty sure people will be happy with that.
Yeah, you have to set small goals when you have a lot of chaos going on. So we'll see what happens. But, thank you so much for joining the show this week to share some insight on what's been going on with Florida State. Where can our listeners follow you and your articles for The Athletic and all your sports coverage?
Well, you can just follow me on social media at Tashan Reed and also at theathletic.com/Tashan Reed to read all of my work. That's pretty much it, yeah. I cover Florida State, pretty much Florida State football specifically, year-round. That's all I focus on, no basketball, nothing else. So for people that want their die-hard nose coverage, I'm the guy.